I'm mad as hell. The health district ruined my life. It ruined my family's life.
In the summer of 2007, Dan Pollock documented his dying days. Photos, environmental testing, and medical records show he was exposed for years to toxic mold growing over his desk inside the health district's main building on Shadow Lane.
Very exhausted. And can't think well. Don't remember things.
The man whose dedication to his job led to a torturous death is at the center of a federal lawsuit.
There are no words to describe how horrifying and tormenting his death was.
His family and a second health district employee named Lori Boswell have now filed suit in district court.
I've been made sick because my husband brought home the mold spores, and I was near him, with him, caring for him, loving him.
The lawsuit alleges the health district failed to keep its own headquarters healthy.
I'm so angry. It's hard. It's really hard every day.
An attorney for the Pollocks and Boswells says the health district knew about the mold and willfully disregarded the safety and health of employees and their families. The lawsuit says the district failed to take any precautions, resulting in severe disability and death.
There's water on the floor, there's water on the ceiling, there's mold on the ceiling, and we saw it ourselves. Right. There is mold.
We do have a problem right here, and it is being addressed.
Well, Linda, we did see water on the ground and mold on the ceiling. Mm-hmm. Isn't that a concern to you?
If you have a water leak and you find it on a Tuesday, don't wait till Saturday to repair it.
98% of the homes and buildings throughout our region I walk into, there's mold there somewhere. Most of the time, the homeowner and building owners have no idea that it's there.
He's been coughing to the point where he's throwing up at night. You're okay.
A lot of good doctors in our area, in the whole Detroit area, Ann Arbor area, that deal in it, but traditional medicine does not really still accept mold as an issue. And quite honestly, I see it all day, 5 days a week.
This is no secret here about these sick buildings in this city here. They knew about it.
City Hall is full of black mold, and now the city's police chief has been canned.
That school needs remediation immediately.
This is a major issue that's impacting a lot of people.
We pulled up the rugs. We went behind the walls. We got the answers, and it's unequivocal. That courthouse is littered with dangerous levels of toxic, cancer-causing mold.
Would you call this a crisis?
I actually would. I think we've reached that point. It's a problem that has been sort of kicked down the road for years and years and is now coming to a head.
You know, the furniture, I've had a lot of people question, do they have to throw their furniture out? The problem is that it's going to start to create mold, and that mold can eventually pretty much take you out if you're not, if you're breathing that in, it'll pretty much take you out. But you can see here that these properties are right on the water. And even though that there's still so much garbage out here. It's like a kitchen cabinet, and you can see that the water came about 20, maybe 18 to 20 inches inside of this cabinet. You can see the water line. So these people's kitchen right here, you can see the water line. So we're talking, if you were to stand up that piece of furniture, we'd have water just above our knees. It's crazy. You can see the water line inside, and you can notice that the area that was in the water is already starting to mold. You can see the mold coming all through there. And that is why they have to get rid of this stuff. The furniture and kitchen cabinets, anything that was in the water has to be removed because it'll start to create mold. And that mold will lead to respiratory problems, which can actually be terminal if you were to stay inside the house and your body wasn't able to handle that.
Immediately it can start growing. If it's not treated, then it could just start kind of spreading throughout the home.
It comes in all kinds of shapes, colors, and sizes, and it could be growing in your home right now. We're talking about mold.
Even if you didn't have substantial flooding from Hurricane Ian, just any water that got in could cause mold.
It's best to assess your home now before it starts spreading. In tonight's cover story, ABC 7's Amanda Lojeski gets us more on how to spot the mold.
With mold, sometimes you can see it, sometimes you can smell it, but other times it's hidden. That's why experts are encouraging you to air out your homes now before it becomes a breeding ground for mold.
Florida is very well known for that.
Hurricane Ian left behind damage and a growing threat.
There's no light entering it, there's no ventilation because power has been gone.
That threat is mold.
The quickness that mold can grow, how quick is that?
Immediately it can start growing. If it's not treated, then it could just start kind of spreading throughout the home.
For some, a smell might be seeping into your home or business.
Folks who aren't sensitive will not pick it up. Some of the more stronger molds, the black molds and the fungi, you'll really start to smell it, but not all the time.
And while our nose is a great tool to spot mold, you might actually be able to see it.
You'll see the discoloration of drywall.
George Negron is the SVP for Timilon, an air quality company in Southwest Florida.
Timilon means no limit backwards, so that's the name of the company.
He says any water intake can cause mold to grow in carpets, furniture.
Your belongings as well. I think oftentimes you see mold cases and people's contents, like their clothing, their paper articles, their pictures, that all gets destroyed because it'll get onto the surfaces.
Mold is also a health risk.
Those with asthma and allergy and respiratory illnesses, they are the most susceptible to it. It can really catch up to you and it could really destroy your home.
Negron says you should make sure your air conditioning is running.
When you look at it from a recovery from Ian, the air system shouldn't just be run after a flood. They're important and they're a must. But running that air system throughout the year in the home.
So what should you do, especially if you don't know you have mold at all?
Don't wait for your adjuster. Don't wait for someone to come and tell you, because often those weeks are crucial. They'll really just turn it on. Just get that air circulated, get it regulated, because by the time that adjuster comes, you have saved yourself not just on a money value, but on a health as well.
Shyla Madalena has lived in this Hollywood apartment for 8 years. Her boyfriend, Scott Weil, has been here for 11. She says when she moved in back in 2012, she got sick a lot, but thought it was because she had just moved to Los Angeles and maybe had new allergies. She says the management company began years of renovations right away, so she assumed she was still having respiratory issues because of that. But once construction stopped 7 years later, she was still having unbearable symptoms.
I'm having fainting spells, I'm having respiratory issues, I can't breathe in my apartment, I'm having aches and pains, I'm having numbness in my arm.
Last fall, she overheard a neighbor complaining of the same symptoms and found out her unit had tested positive for mold. When management tested Shyla's apartment with an air sample, she was told the air quality was great, but when she hired her own mold inspector,
we found several areas of toxic mold in my apartment.
She says it wasn't a surprise considering how many floods she's had in her unit.
There was a flood in my bathroom, there was a flood in my closet, there was a flood in my water heater, there was a flood in the dishwasher, and everything took months to resolve.
Shyla says she can't sleep in her apartment anymore because she's sick and so are her dogs. She's been staying at Airbnbs, and if she does have to come home, she sleeps outside on the balcony, which is where Scott has been living.
Completely inhumane, despicable. I'm just at a loss of words.
They aren't the only residents who have experienced this.
And my son has a mold colony growing in his nose, and so at night, literally, he can't breathe.
Beata Dicker lived here for 10 years with 3 kids and her husband. She just moved out a couple of weeks ago after dealing with similar issues, years of floods that were never properly fixed, and what she calls negligent management. She says management told her her unit had tested negative for mold, but she was skeptical, so she decided to get her own testing done.
I was able to pull apart the wall and find black mold in my kids' room. And when I showed this to management, they said it was dirt.
Scott says their complaints were answered with this, a maintenance worker painting over mold instead of doing proper remediation. After numerous disputes with management, residents hired an attorney.
It is implied in every single residential lease agreement. They've got to maintain the premises in a habitable condition.
Shyla and Scott love living so close to Runyon Canyon and don't want to move. They want management to fix the problem, not only in their unit, but in the entire building.
Starting a family contained all the usual joys and difficulties for Hannah Cousins and Darren McGuinness. But the couple didn't expect what happened while renting for 5 years in regional Victoria.
In the last year that we were in the house, we would have, I think the kids and Darren and I would have been sick for at least 6 to 7 months of that year.
It wasn't until Luella was taken to a new paediatrician the suspicion was raised that black mold in their rental home may be making them sick.
He basically said that she and all of us were most likely suffering from like a black mold poisoning toxicity.
When a builder was called in to fix a leaky bathroom, he was shocked by what he found.
The most black mold he'd ever seen in a house. That the cleaners that we got in to do the end of lease clean had found that there was black mold coming out of the carpets.
Making a link between black mold and illness isn't all that simple. Evidence suggests it causes CIRS, or chronic inflammatory response syndrome, but there's not yet an accepted way to diagnose the illness. Dr. Charlie Ahn is undertaking new federally funded research that is seeking to fix that.
Well, guys, it's been a back-and-forth battle for the Churchman family, from finding out their home was full of toxic mold to dealing with insurance companies and banks. Now they've been told to remove all of their belongings from the house, but being inside the house for too long could be lethal. At first glance, everything looks normal, but when you take a closer look, you'll find mold covering just about everything.
And it got so bad that I had to start putting my toothbrush in the refrigerator at night because I get up the next morning and there'd be black mold in it.
The problem began in early 2009 and quickly forced Elizabeth and her husband John to move into a motel.
I guess I'm better off than some people. I at least have a bed to sleep in, but after coming from a nice home, this is a beautiful home. After coming from a home and going to one room, how would you feel?
Elizabeth says that in March of 2010, their insurance company told them the house was safe to live in, but further testing still showed high levels of toxic mold.
And I'm not sure I'm saying these words right. Stachybochi is the #1 killer, and anytime you get that in your house, you can't get rid of it. That's the killer. The penicillium, the cladosporium, and the aspergillus. The aspergillus is what got in our lungs, is the reason we're on oxygen.
It's also the reason why they're forced to wear these masks every time they enter the home. And after 30 years of living there, she says she hopes something can be salvaged.
All of my baby's pictures are there. There are a handful of things I could salvage. Just a handful of things would mean a lot to me. More than losing everything.
My first symptoms were really just absolutely bone-numbing fatigue. Then the lungs, sinuses, terrible infections.
Eileen Mullen was granted workers' comp after doctors determined that mold inside the St. Petersburg VA benefits office where she works made her sick. As the I-Team first reported, multiple reports show mold has been detected in the building for several years. Constant leaks from a skylight and the roof have been blamed for the problem.
January 2012 was when I was taken out in the ambulance.
Since suffering her first life-threatening asthma attack, Mullen has depended on nebulizers, inhalers, and prescription drugs to breathe. Qualifying for workers' comp has created additional issues since her regular employee health insurance coverage no longer applies.
They reversed the charges for my doctors, and the doctors in turn have billed me, creating an enormous financial debt.
Mullen says she's so sick from her recent attack she can't work, and she's not getting paid because she's used up all her medical leave. And the same doctors who once treated her won't treat her anymore because of reimbursement issues.
And I've actually been unable to find an allergist, pulmonologist, or an ENT in the state of Florida that will accept federal workman's compensation.
This is our attempt to try to find a doctor in the state of Florida that will treat our employees.
The VA Employees Union bought ads that ran in newspapers statewide, but nobody has responded.
Because they get paid at the Medicare rate, it's not lucrative for them.
Local union president Valerie Riley says 2 union members have retired early as a result of respiratory issues. Dozens of others have complained of asthma, nosebleeds, and even vomiting.
I would say easily 30, 40, 50.
Many fear they could soon be in the same boat as Mullen regarding declining health and insurance coverage issues.
My health is like riding a roller coaster with blindfolds on. I never know when it's going to get worse.
Mullen recently had to travel to Massachusetts General Hospital to be seen by a specialist.
You shouldn't have to go across the country to find treatment when you're a federal employee and you're coming in and working for veterans.
The VA says it can't comment on specific employees' health issues, but says workers' comp is handled by the Department of Labor, not their agency. Congressman David Jolly says he's looking into the issue further.
The important thing is that those who serve within the VA to provide for our veterans are accommodated with the appropriate benefits that any other employee would have.
Mullen says getting sick is not even the worst thing that's happened.
I'm angry that I have to be here talking to you, Adam. I'm very angry. People have wanted me to put my plea out there for years, and I didn't want to do it. But now, I guess, Adam, like you say, what do I feel about the government? Now I really know. It's confirmed all the way up. Nobody cares.
John Collis shows us where this problem started.
Well, bad smell.
Saturday morning, John says the water started flowing.
Opened my kid's bathroom door. There's water running out the ceiling. Put my ear up against the wall and just heard a waterfall.
The problem started in the bathroom of the unit right above John's, and when the property maintenance guy showed up, John says he saw an even bigger issue.
He pulled black mold out of the one spot the guy cut a hole in the roof. And when you get down to the base, you see the baseboard covered in black mold.
The apartment manager said the wet spots needed to dry, promising they'd be back to patch them up. Not a good enough solution for John.
I have a 2-year-old little boy and a 7-year-old little girl that sleep right in here. With this and the smell, I don't think so. And seeing this, now we're realizing why my son has had constant health and respiratory issues in the last 9-10 months.
Like many FGCU students, Gabriella Polano lives at the Reef Student Living Apartments off campus. She says she and her roommates have an uninvited guest in their unit, disgusting mold. She thinks it's affecting her health.
Every morning when I wake up with like a terrible sore throat, and then it goes away throughout the day.
Gabriella says mold has covered everything from walls to mattresses, underneath dresser drawers, and even their shoes.
I personally think that the mold comes from something that was done wrong with this building.
These photos of the mold she posted Monday on Facebook got a huge response.
I've gotten hundreds of comments, photos, likes of people who live in the Reef and have mold on their clothes, under their drawers, on their shoes.
She said the Reef sent someone out to clean up the mold and even installed this dehumidifier. She said they also told her they would have someone check the AC.
But the way that they're handling it is not like it's a serious matter. In my personal opinion, I think that it's very serious because we're surrounded by it, we're inhaling it.
A mold danger, a rental home riddled with it.
It feels like your chest is on fire.
And a tenant who says he's trapped. He can't live in this dangerous rental, yet his landlord is still demanding cash.
This tenant has not been treated fairly. This tenant has been treated horribly, and somebody needs to be held responsible.
According to the test results that I recently got, he said that this is highly toxic.
Sean and his father are renting this home on Tacoma Street in Clawson, and earlier this year, both started feeling sick.
Congested, real high.
Sean noticed what he thought was black mold behind the bathroom vanity. He called the property manager right away.
But what have they done?
Excuses.
Sean then hired a mold expert to test the rental, and the results were shocking. High levels of dangerous black mold in several parts of the home.
Have they been trying to work with you at all?
No.
After we aired this report and contacted the property manager on the phone, we were told this problem would be fixed. The property manager paid for Sean and his family to stay at a motel. They hired a crew to clean the mold. The problem? When Sean moved back in, his symptoms got worse. A new mold test by an independent expert revealed that the mold levels were now off the charts. It got so bad, the city moved in. Determining the home is a big danger. Sean had to move. Everything he owned inside contaminated. But get this, his landlord was still demanding roughly $2,000 in rent, payment for the months when Sean was living in the toxic rental.
If they've determined, and they can determine, that the property that was rented isn't habitable or isn't suitable, then they are not under an obligation to pay the rent.
Neil Rockine is a Local 4 legal expert.
The tenant is not left without rights in this case.
Yet Sean was being pressured to pay up. So I went to find the owner, this guy, Antoine. He ignored my calls and thought on this day he was going to walk right by me.
Why are you allowing this to happen?
What are we talking about?
We're talking about the property in Tacoma.
What exactly are we talking about?
The mold?
What mold?
You're not aware of the mold?
My understanding is there was a spot about this big that was in the kitchen.
No.
Okay.
You know the situation with the mold.
Antoine says he was out of the country when these problems were revealed, and he wasn't aware how big the problem had become. He also apparently was not aware his home was a danger.
It's right out front of the home.
When was this done?
Big no. 2 weeks ago.
Now it's time to give Sean something he's been waiting months for, a chance to speak with Antoine on the phone.
I'd like to talk to this tenant to understand what's going on. I have not seen this latest report you're talking about.
Let's call him right now.
You know what? Unfortunately, I've got a lunch meeting I got to get to.
No, I think this is important.
Okay,
You're
let's
the
do it.
owner
You're
of
right.
this
No, you're
property.
right. Let's take care of it.
Our symptoms are getting worse.
As of right now, though, he's being told by your property manager he has to pay the rent.
So I wasn't aware of the city notice. So I'll look into that. You know, that's one thing I wasn't aware of. The second piece of it is obviously for the time that you're not able to live in the house for these reasons, you shouldn't be charged rent for that. That's obvious to me. Okay.
This tenant has been treated horribly, and somebody needs to be held responsible. It's just not fair.
When these sailors and Marines left the U.S. to serve their country, no one imagined many would come home to this.
So you know people who were affected in this house? Yes. And then over in this house, and that house.
Norfolk Naval Base in Virginia is the largest in the world, home to the U.S. Atlantic Fleet. But it's facing a crisis.
I'm, in essence, combating a war on two fronts.
I don't feel safe in these houses. I've never not felt safe in a house.
A crisis that has turned dozens of military families, their children and pets into virtual refugees, holed up in cramped hotel rooms for weeks at a time. They call this hotel wing the mold wing.
She was hospitalized.
Displaced families who tell us they or their kids are sick after living in rotting homes and being exposed in some cases to unhealthy levels of mold.
Roughly how many times have you either been to a doctor or been to the emergency room because of your illnesses or the illnesses of your kids? If you had to guess, half a dozen times?
50. Yeah.
50?
Yeah. They told me it was stress. They told me it was stress and a panic attack until they found the lesions on my brain. I lost all mobility on my left side in October. They thought I was having a stroke.
Although a direct link is hard to prove, symptoms described by these young women are consistent with possible effects of mold exposure, according to the Centers for Disease Control and the World Health Organization. Military wives who were getting sicker and sicker say their living conditions were ignored or covered up by a private management company. Lincoln Military Housing, or LMH, is a subsidiary of one of the largest property management firms in America. After Congress privatized military family housing, Lincoln partnered with the Navy in 2005, taking control of renovating old homes and building new ones in the Norfolk area in exchange for guaranteed rent. The Navy was thrilled.
Our long-term partnership with Lincoln has been extremely successful. We've been able to accomplish things in terms of providing quality homes I don't think we ever would have accomplished.
Gerald Bliss runs Lincoln Military Housing.
Under the terms of the contract, within a 2-year period, all homes were supposed to be brought up to a suitable level. Was that done, in your opinion? And by suitable, I mean all of them livable.
Yes, I believe it was, under the terms of our agreement with the Navy.
We have an obligation to the families. We want to provide them great housing, suitable housing, comfortable housing.
Right. They try to blame our mold on our dogs.
Yet military spouses we spoke with tell a very different story.
The second story was sinking into the first.
My house is like a moat. It lives in a puddle of water.
A story of decaying homes and well-meaning but incompetent maintenance people.
Right here's my home.
Shelley Federico moved into Lincoln Military Housing October 2010. When she moved out a year later, she had filed more than 24 complaints with Lincoln Maintenance related to water damage and penetration.
They would send someone out and they would say, "Oh, Miss Federico, no problems. We're just gonna need to caulk your window."
Shelley says she developed intense stomach and sinus problems, persistent headaches, skin lesions, and chronic fatigue. Doctors could find no cause, but she says it clicked the day a maintenance man came to remove a section of bedroom wall.
He started taking the insulation out of the walls, and as he was carrying it through my house, there was water dripping out of the insulation that he had just gathered from the wall. As soon as he did that, I immediately started projectile vomiting. My eyes started to swell. It started to get very hard for me to breathe.
When Shelley demanded a mold test, Lincoln instead explained the company had decided to move Shelley and her family to a new home.
When I asked Lincoln Military Housing, they told me that there was no need for a test.
She says Lincoln refused to consider mold as a possibility.
Who had it done independently? All of you.
Paying up to $500 each, Shelley and others hired their own mold inspectors. Results confirmed what they already suspected.
So one of the readings was 33,000. What's a normal reading?
0. I was actually told by a remediator, you're very lucky that you found it when you did. If you would have continued to live this way this whole time, not knowing, you would probably be dead.
All right, this is Shelley Federico's house.
Lincoln's Jarl Bliss took us to see Shelley's former home, which remains vacant because it's now the focus of a lawsuit.
There's a smell in this house, and I understand whether it's just general must, but there's a distinct
it's just
heaviness in this house. No, you don't smell it?
Well, I do a bit, but...
We asked about the high levels of mold spores in Shelley's test.
There's been 3 other reports that have been completed.
And what did they tell you about this house?
That they had low levels.
Lower levels in the report that I saw?
Yes.
But CNN reviewed 2 of the mold reports, both of which confirmed significant levels of mold. Lincoln could not share the results of its own independent test because it's being sued by military families. Lincoln knew it was inheriting hundreds of older, poorly built homes. And while Bliss denies a systemic mold problem, he admits maintenance fell short.
I understand why some of the families are frustrated in this issue. I'd be frustrated too with some of the things that went on. We've made mistakes, and we're working through those mistakes.
But that's not good enough for the families. Lincoln is now fighting a lawsuit by Shelley and others that claims the company's failure to properly maintain their homes caused them serious health problems.
You know, we're sending our men and women to go fight for this country. We don't ask for a mansion on the hill. We just ask for a safe place to lay our head at night that's not going to make us sick, and it's not going to make our families sick. That's all we ask.
Aaron, that's right. This story serves as a lesson for anyone in the market for a flipped foreclosure home. These workers are about to start cleaning work behind me on mold that is crawling all through a crawl space. Now, before the work began, I shot some pictures to show you what this mold looks like. The buyers of this home had no idea the mold was here until it started making them sick. And what the home flipper is saying about this, well, for them, that's hard to stomach too.
The Odorizzi family had to flee their flipped foreclosure 3 weeks ago. What was underneath was unbearable, causing constant respiratory symptoms.
And we just noticed that whenever we left the house, it got better. And then when we came back to the house, it would get a lot worse.
Their mold remediator says former foreclosures are a prime breeding ground, and buyers should be on the lookout.
It's been sitting unconditioned, uncared for a very extensive period of time. And so you've really got to beware, and you've got to really look for mold that might be growing underneath the house.
The Odorizzi's home inspection contract excludes having to even look for mold. They blame the house flipper.
Flipper is saying they have no responsibility at all. They claim that the mold came afterwards, after we moved in, and is due to our negligence.
The flipper, a local We Buy Ugly Houses franchise, told me the same thing on the phone. Their office is at this UPS store.
They're saying that none of this mold was here in February when they bought the house.
I find that very, very hard to believe. It's, in fact, impossible.
The family's paying $6,000 plus to get rid of the mold. With a 2-year-old and another baby on the way, they just hope it costs only money.
It's concerning because, I mean, we had her in it for months, and I've been breathing it since before I got pregnant, and who knows? I mean, who knows what it can do.
Natalie Bankhead is working hard to restore her deteriorating health. She's been seeking treatment through Dr. Peter Osborne with Town Center Wellness. She was teaching French at Klein High School last year. When she was moved to a different classroom, she says she immediately got a headache, and it happened every time she walked in the room.
and within a few hours I started to have a really bad headache. And then we were moving my classroom, and then a couple days later when the class started, I started to have asthma attacks.
Natalie says her health began to decline, so she began to ask for help, especially when she noticed this. She says black mold was growing on the vents.
I did file a complaint, and they did clean the vents, and that helped. And Dr. Osborne advised me to buy an air purifier for the classroom. And that was in January, so that helped me.
She even started taking asthma medication, but she says the mold grew back.
It was a hard decision for me to be, can I make it a year? But as I saw every week my health going down and having chronic cough and feeling worse.
Sometimes a mold response is kind of like a low burning fire, as opposed to the fire that just, burns the house down immediately. It's a low smoldering fire that just continues to chronically degrade a person's health.
I am feeling so much better.
Rhonda Topping knows the feeling, but she was slightly offended when Dr. Osborne suggested she check for mold in her home.
The first thing you think is, I don't have a mold. I know my house. I'm a fairly nice, house cleaner, and so I knew I didn't have a mold, and so I was like,
This isn't her home, but it turns out her house was full of black mold like this. It was living between the walls, and it was also under her car mats. It was smothering her, and she couldn't even see it. She was in and out of the emergency room, and no one could figure out why. She was nauseous. She had headaches. It made her blood pressure spike.
I felt like lightning went from this side to this side. And high blood pressure causes stroke. And it was so painful, it brought me to my knees. And I just like, oh God, please help me, And that was when I got to get out of here.
Rhonda did move out while her husband continues to rip out walls and tear out mold to help her.
I had to get a brand new apartment, never lived in, new furniture and stuff. I had to get that highest floor so nobody leaks on me. So I kind of refer to myself as Rapunzel in her tall tower.
Dr. Osborne says a lowered immune system is often the first sign of mold exposure, perhaps someone getting more infections, a heightened sense of allergic reactions, or a sudden onset of chronic coughing and sneezing. Many things can cause mold in your home, something as severe as flooding from a storm. Then humidity sparks the growth. But it can be as simple as just a slow leaking pipe.
It's mold all over the walls. It's mold all over the roof.
Ted Carpenter posted this video of the inside of his utility closet that's attached to his apartment.
I posted that video out of anger, to be honest. I was angry. I was like, no one's helping me. Like, no one.
He says he learned about the mold in his unit shortly after moving into the North Hills apartments in 2019. He says workers hired by the complex painted over it at one point. Property management says they have no record of that. Carpenter says he was concerned about how his living conditions may have been impacting his entire family, especially his and his girlfriend's daughters, who were in and out of emergency rooms for breathing issues. In one instance, he says a child had to be airlifted to Children's Hospital for care.
When they were going back and forth to the hospital, we didn't understand what was going on. We would be in the house. We would tell them, don't go outside, don't run too much, because we're thinking them going outside running is the cause of the asthma.
Carpenter paid on his own to have the mold in his apartment tested through the Mold Test Company. News 4 has verified that the company recommended mold remediation. Other residents in his building shared their own concerns with us.
And I'm scared to turn the air on because for the mold smelling.
It's like water coming in when it rains. It's water coming inside the apartment.
Carpenter says it was a heavy rain that we got 2 weeks ago that caused the county to condemn his place.
I moved the blinds, and that's when I saw all this mold.
Gloria Coleman says it was only after plunking down more than $7,000 did she discover a problem with her new Parkland apartment.
This mold, very heavily mold in the tracks of the window.
She hired a licensed mold assessor who said surface sampling from the window did confirm elevated mold levels. At this point, Gloria, who had just moved to South Florida, who had signed the lease and paid the money before she even saw the unit, had yet to move in. So at this point, what's your desired resolution?
My resolution is to leave. I found another place that is healthy, and I wanted to take my money and go there.
I contacted the property manager, and after that, Gloria said the owner now would let her out of her lease and refund her money. A recurring question into the Call Christina hotline, though, when it comes to mold, as whether you can stop paying rent at the first sight of it.
That's the number one misconception, because it's very specific of what you have to do. The majority of evictions we see are the non-payment of rent.
Rebecca Schramm of Legal Services of Greater Miami said your first step, give notice to the landlord or property manager in writing. Make sure to keep a copy of that letter.
You give them a letter saying you need to correct these problems within 7 days or I'm going to withhold my rent. You need to save your rent because the court is going to ask you, well, I understand you have these conditions, but where's the rent, right? You should still have the rent even though you have these conditions issues.
You also want to have it just in case there is an order to deposit and document the problem.
What a lot of tenants say is, hey, I've been complaining about this for years, for months, but they have no proof of that.
We left all these out there for only 30 minutes, not like a few days, and to see that there's so much on it, I mean, what does this actually tell us?
In the air, there are mold.
Oh my gosh, that is scary.
Yes. So there are a lot of diversity of mold species in the air. The person living there or spending a prolonged period of time in that environment will be breathing in a lot of spores. It's not good for their health.
So sometimes there's a bit of a smell also that comes with mold.
Sometimes some species of mold, they will produce volatile organic compounds, and you can smell it. If you can smell it, means there's a lot of it.
Oh.
Yes. So that's the musty smell.
So the moment you smell it, it's like really bad. You really need to get it fixed.
Yeah.
Yes, you heard it. There is mold all around us, even in the air we breathe. The spores are released from the mold found on surfaces in our environment, which include our homes. So how big a health problem is all this mold?
The greater your exposure, theoretically higher your risk.
You might be familiar with this, but did you know they can also be in the air that we breathe? Professor Sanjay Chotimal studies the effect of mold and fungi on human health. I want to know how concerned I should be.
So I understand that there is mold around us all the time and we're living and breathing with it, right? How harmful can that be for us?
There are some groups of individuals that would be at risk of mold exposure at the home, particularly those who have allergies, known allergies, asthma. The second group of people would be those who have an immunosuppression.
Right.
And we see people who, let's say, have cancer, have liver disease, on chemotherapy, or received long-term steroid treatment that would dampen their immune system, and therefore then exposure to mold may be a risk.
But for a normal, healthy person, how much concern?
Okay, so that's a really good question. We must recognize that even healthy people are susceptible to bouts where their immune function may change. For instance, some people develop allergies later in life. Some people, we will all have chest infections at some point. We may have some surgery, whether minor or not, and recover at home. This all disrupts our immune system. So we do need to be aware that if we see mold in the home, I think it's best to get rid of it.
How does it affect me when I breathe in mold spores?
When you breathe it in, it initially goes through your nose and mouth, makes its way down. Here's a model of the lung to illustrate that. It goes down the main tubes of your airways called the trachea. This will then divide into bronchi, which then divide into smaller airways, eventually reaching the lung tissue itself. So once that spore reaches the tips of the lung, they meet what we call cells of the immune system. We call them the policemen of the airway. They gobble up the fungal spores and get rid of them, destroy them.
Right.
But that's only if your immune system is functioning normally. If your immune system is overactive or underactive, you may be susceptible because the immune police cannot necessarily clear the spores that you inhale. That's when problems could arise.
I never realized there was a silent killer in the school that was killing me and affecting other students right along the whole time I was in the building.
A former teacher at Sullivan North High School has now filed a lawsuit against the Sullivan County school system, claiming he got sick due to mold inside the school.
I really had no other choice.
In the lawsuit, Michael Upchurch claims the school system saw results of physical tests that he took, and he says they ignored them.
And I reported it to the supervisor, my principal, and he said he would take care of it, and then They came in and discredited me and told me there's no mold.
Instead,
They countered my claim of mold being in the school by producing an air test that challenged my physical test.
but Upchurch says the air test.
Is known not to pick up black mold.
The lawsuit also claims that mold inside the school contributed to Upchurch's long-term health problems.
I'm not just after money. I mean, I wasn't after money when I started this. If they would have done what was right and they would have fixed their leaky roof and kept this from happening and getting other people sick, there would have never been a lawsuit or anything over this.
Upchurch says his main reason for filing this lawsuit.
I want the public to be aware of the dangers of this.
This headache, pressure, the inner ear pressure that was so bad, and all in here, fatigue.
1 month after Sandra Clark moved into her Greenville townhome, she said she started to feel sick.
I didn't know why, and I was like, what is wrong with me? Why am I getting sick like this?
Clark says her conditions prompted her to question her landlord about previous water leaks at the property. She said the landlord admitted there had been leaks and told Clark to remove the air filters and spray Clorox.
I immediately went straight and removed the air filter and discovered there was a current water leak and there was mold all in the open area where the AC return is.
Specialists say Clorox is not the proper way to treat mold. Home improvement stores have do-it-yourself kits, but getting professional help is the best thing to do to prevent further contamination.
Bleach feeds mold. Doesn't kill it. All it does is eliminate the color and makes you think it's gone. But once the chlorine evaporates, all you're left with is water, and moisture feeds mold. So if you're putting bleach on mold, you're actually helping it grow.
This is a report from a professional mold inspector done just a few days ago. This shows the mold level inside that home is so serious, the family inside needs to get out now. Kernesha Ellington and her family moved into their Forest Ridge townhouse 2 years ago. The floods in the basement started shortly after that. I found building inspection reports and complaints on the unit that go back for years. All 5 members of the family are showing the same symptoms.
Cough, sneezing, wheezing. My son, he coughs through the night. All you hear is him wheezing. My daughter the same way. She coughs and she's wheezing as well.
Last week, Kernesha contacted a mold inspection expert, and when the results came in, they knew why they'd all been sick. Brett Albert, the inspector, found a mold spore level in the basement 3 times the point where professional remediation is required. His report saying there should be no one living in this house at this time. The occupants need to leave immediately.
On a scale of 1 to 10, I would say it's probably about an 8 in severity. They need to get out of that house.
When you've got 3 boys under the age of 8 and a dog, living in an RV can be a tight fit.
I'm embarrassed for you to see that room.
But for the Huffmans, it's home. This isn't their dream home, but for now, a place where they can feel safe. The Huffmans moved to San Diego back in 2016. Matt's a staff sergeant in the Marines.
We were nervous first coming out here, you know, the change in the cost of living and everything, and so we decided to go with base housing.
That's April Huffman, or to these 3 boys, Mom. She says at the end of 2018, they moved into this community in the Tierra Santa area, run by the private government contractor Lincoln Military Housing. According to the lawsuit the family filed against San Diego Family Housing and Lincoln Military Property Management, the Huffmans discovered multiple defects and problems with the home. April says within a week of moving in, 2 of her boys got sick.
These 2 just started having like a really bad cold or something coming on.
April says those cold-like symptoms didn't go away. And for one of her boys, things got much worse. Logan had trouble breathing, a sight his dad could barely handle.
Sitting there watching him in the hospital bed, struggling to breathe, and having a hard time reacting to the medication and stuff they're doing.
With no answers, the family says they called in a company to run air tests and swabs.
It came back with several different toxic molds.
April says they contacted Lincoln to let them know, but things didn't go smoothly.
It took us demanding and getting his command involved to get them to displace us so that we could leave the home. So we did. We left the home and then we went and lived in a hotel for about 3 months.
The company eventually pulled different parts of the house apart. Matt says these pictures show what they found and what his family was living in. The Huffman's lawsuit claims there was microbial growth and contamination inside the home, visible microbial growth in the kitchen and bathroom, an odor throughout the interior living spaces, and elevated moisture levels.
This family was exposed to microbial spores and water intrusion in their home, which caused them health issues, including respiratory issues, asthma, skin rashes, headaches, nosebleeds, things like that.
Jessica Sizemore-Wetzel is the family's lawyer.
As people, we value the safety and sanctity of our homes, and for over a year, this family was unable to enjoy that.
A spokesperson for Lincoln Military Housing didn't comment on the Huffman's lawsuit. In court filings, they've denied all allegations. The lawsuit is still in the early pretrial stages. A spokesperson for Lincoln Military Housing says that they treat all reports of water intrusion or mold as an emergency request. In a statement, the spokesperson wrote in part, "If water intrusion or suspected mold is found in a home, we promptly remediate it and will enlist the support of licensed contractors and third-party microbial experts as necessary." Team 10 discovered at least 7 other lawsuits in the San Diego area that claim microbial spores or mold in military housing that's run by Lincoln or one of its other subsidiaries or affiliated companies. Lawyers for the Clover family shared these photos with Team 10. Their 2019 lawsuit claims they were exposed to excessive moisture, dampness, and humidity, as well as microbial contamination. In that case, Lincoln also denied the allegations. Lincoln's legal team asked the case be thrown out, claiming as government contractors, they're protected from being held liable. There's also this case.
My breathing was bad. I got sick a lot.
In 2019, a Marine Corps family won a $2 million lawsuit against Lincoln Military Housing after they say mold made their children sick. The court agreed with the family about medical expenses and left part of the decision in place. However, the judge ordered a new trial over the issue of money for pain and suffering and past emotional distress.
We have a real problem here.
Complaints from residents are nothing new for government contractors that run military housing. In 2019, the heads of 5 different companies, including the then president of Lincoln Military Housing, testified before Congress about the current condition of the military housing privatization initiative.
The men and women of LMH work every day to serve all of our families with honor and integrity.
Senators grilled the men about housing conditions and complaints.
How many military children deserve to be exposed to mold, lead, or other health hazards as a consequence of living in privatized housing units?
0, Senator.
I agree, Senator. 0.
I also agree, Senator. 0.
A spokesperson for Lincoln says they stand behind the statement they made to Congress in 2019, and they strive for every one of their residents to be 100% satisfied with their Lincoln experience. That congressional hearing happened about 3 months after the Huffmans moved into their San Diego home.
Everything porous, or paper and things like that, we had to trash. Our sofa, entertainment centers, bookshelves, mattresses, sheets and comforters, everything like that had to be thrown out onto the street.
Matt says they had to start over, first in a hotel, then this RV. While most of his things can be replaced, the letters his dad wrote him while in boot camp can't.
A lot of them were from my dad, and
he passed away about 10 years ago.
so just those memories. Just having to throw them away and not being able to read back through them.
Adam Merkusen, ABC 10 News.
That is difficult.
She's a healthy, happy baby now, but 1-year-old Kate almost didn't make it.
This is the one thing we had wanted more than anything in this world, and to know that you could possibly lose your child before she's even born is hard.
Her mother, Carla Williams, delivered her 3 months early last July. She weighed just 1 pound, 10 ounces. Soon after, Williams discovered mold growing in their kitchen cabinets, closets, and windowsills. She called an inspector who determined the mold was at dangerous levels.
I specifically asked him, if it were your family, what would you do? And he said, I would get out.
They packed their bags the next day and asked their landlord to fix it.
She just kind of brushed it off. She was like, yeah, it's mildew, don't worry about it.
Within a month, the landlord rented out the same house to another tenant. I called him today and found out he got sick too and has since moved out. So I took the report and pictures to another mold expert, Eric Ambrose at Caremaster in Greenville.
it is a situation where you'd want to vacate the premises.
Ambrose agrees the mold levels are excessive and when inhaled or ingested can contaminate your bloodstream.
Prolonged exposure raises the chances of somebody falling deathly ill.
What about pregnant women?
Especially pregnant women.
Tupelo is facing another lawsuit, this time from a member of the police force. Officer Brandon Garrett is suing the city for failing to provide a safe place to work and demoting him because he requested a transfer. Garrett worked as a detective in this building, which was contaminated with mold. He informed the city about his mold-related illnesses. According to the suit, that's why the city abandoned the Court Street building and moved to the old airport. Garrett claims the city moved contaminated furniture and records to the new location, and his illness continued. The 12-year veteran asked to be transferred to the training academy to avoid the exposure, but instead was assigned to the patrol division. Garrett is claiming the city allowed 2 other detectives with mold illnesses to keep their rank and work from a non-contaminated building. He says he's getting false write-ups from his superiors because he complained about the mold and his demotion. That lawsuit wants a jury to determine the damages in the case and for the plaintiff to be assigned to a building without mold.
I like to say there's no such thing as a mold problem, it's a moisture problem. Mold is just what you get when you have one.
It seems counterintuitive to me, right? That newer homes would be safer than much older builds.
Oddly enough, mold is a fairly new thing. You never heard of it 50 years ago. And the reason for that is we constructed buildings differently 50 years ago. Most older homes might be constructed of concrete, plaster, and wood. Mold doesn't grow well on any of those materials. What it does grow well on is cellulose-based things like drywall. And in the 70s, we changed the way we construct buildings. 1, we started using a lot more drywall, and 2, we started to try to save energy. In order to do that, we insulate things and make them tight. We don't allow them to ventilate. You can actually get drywall wet with a garden hose, and mold won't grow if you dry it out real fast within 72 hours or so. Mold won't grow on plaster pretty much at all, although again it will grow on the dust and so forth that settles there. So as we tighten up buildings, if something gets wet, there's no way for it to get dry. The water is just trapped. Commonplace we find that in office facilities is behind vinyl cove base. We put that stuff on the ground, it's completely non-porous. Same thing with vinyl wallpaper. Vinyl wallpaper in the state of Florida do not mix. As soon as any moisture gets behind that, it has no place to go, it's just stuck. It won't dry. And so mold finds a nice suitable place for itself to grow. In the older days, we had a lot of ventilation inside wall cavities. Houses weren't sealed as well as they were, or office buildings. Something got wet, it got dry by simple air movement. We don't do that anymore because it's more expensive to cool those places.
Once moisture hits something like drywall or that insulation that might be behind the drywall in between the walls,
pretty much. Once it gets wet, after about 72 hours, mold will grow in most circumstances. So especially in the case of a hurricane, water comes in, the power is out, there's no way to dry. The best form of air drying within a house in Florida or an office building in Florida is the air conditioning system. They don't just cool, they also dehumidify.
When it comes to moisture intrusion, identifying that water source, that leak, immediately addressing it, drying it out, doing that within 72 hours is the best thing to do.
Speed is the best of all things. When it comes to water intrusion and mold growth, the faster you react to it, the cheaper it is, period. That's why you'll find that after storms, insurance adjusters will flock to an area where it happened, because the faster they adjust it, the cheaper it is to fix it. You want to, in any case, as soon as something gets wet, if you can't dry it within 72 hours, you want to take it out as quickly as you can.
We're losing our men and women in the military because of mold issues at the base rather than because of ISIS or terrorism.
Right now, the Federal Environmental Protection Agency is meeting with residents about mold problems at base housing at MacDill in Tampa. 8 on Your Side has been reporting on these problems for months now, and an attorney now representing base residents says it's not getting much better. 8 on Your Side's Jeff Patterson joins us now live at the front gate at MacDill. Jeff, you followed this story. What is the latest?
Good evening, Josh. The EPA is meeting with residents right now. That meeting began about 20 minutes ago, or 40 minutes ago now. We understand there are nearly 50 people inside of that meeting, 50 residents meeting with the EPA, but we were not allowed to attend. This is video that Amy Norquist sent us months ago of her child's cough after being exposed to mold inside their base house at MacDill. The problem went on for months until they moved off base.
Like, I would hear our two oldest coughing through the night in their beds. Our two younger children would, they developed like a croupy sounding cough almost all the time.
Today, the EPA is meeting with base residents about the mold issue. But shockingly, an EPA spokesperson told 8 on Your Side they don't regulate anything to do with mold. So I asked, why are they here? Attorney Natalie Quam has the same question. She's representing a number of base residents who have mold problems.
Are those issues solved?
No, they're not solved at all. Actually, they're getting worse.
Quam says despite all of the attention, the mold issues are not being fixed.
I'm getting calls from people leaving the base that are actually going to different states that are finding mold in their belongings where they've relocated.
Quam says instead of fixing the problem, they've hired contractors who aren't getting the job done.
We have instances where we have our own private contractors going in and testing for the mold and finding the mold, yet they're still in this denial phase that they think if they say it doesn't exist, that we'll believe it somehow.
The Ming family spent nearly $1 million to build what they thought would be their dream house. But less than 2 months after moving in, Wendy Ming started to have such severe migraines and dizziness, she ended up in the hospital.
Thought I had a brain tumor or adrenal gland cancer. There were many different things. They tested everything because they could see that I was so sick, but they couldn't figure out why.
Her younger daughter started having uncontrollable nosebleeds, while the rest of the family developed asthma. Doctors finally diagnosed Wendy with neurotoxicity. The Mings say her body was full of poison, caused by a lethal combination of microscopic mold growing behind the walls of their home.
Challenges with the new home, obviously, is the last thing you're going to think about. I mean, you look at the walls are white, and you don't see any obvious water stains.
The Mings say the home is now too dangerous to enter, but you can see through the windows how it's been ripped apart to get to the source of the problem, which they say started when their builder, the Dries Company, didn't wait for timbers to dry after it rained.
What you want to do is make sure that the wood is not still wet, because that's what they did. They covered up the drywall and the insulation over the wet wood, and all the experts agreed that if you encapsulate or cover up the wet wood, it's going to allow mold to grow.
Everything they owned was contaminated and had to be destroyed. They now use borrowed furniture and a rented home as they wait for the Dries Company to pay the $4.75 million they won in a lawsuit.
You know, it's a huge amount of money. We basically just want to restart our lives. We've lost our home. We've lost our health. I'll never be well again, and neither will my eldest daughter.
And no amount of money, she says, will ever let her buy back something so priceless. In Loudoun County, Tisha Thompson, Fox 5 News.
When he pulled that out and took everything apart, the entire unit was full of black mold.
Black mold, a horrifying sight for a mother on the east side. Black mold all throughout a rental home off Kernan Boulevard. On Your Side's Zach Wilcox takes a look at how she's fighting this.
$38,000 worth of belongings destroyed by mold. And as bad as this looks, Crystal Kincaid is more concerned with her health and the health of her children. It's gotten to the point that she's willing to take her moldy battle with her landlord to the courtroom.
It was a good place for my kid's school district. Good floor plan layout.
When Crystal Kincaid first started renting her home off of Kernan Boulevard in 2015, it felt like a good fit. However, over the past few years, the problems keep mounting.
The water heater caught on fire. My main bathroom or bedroom had a slab leak. I noticed an issue with the kitchen floor, and it was almost like as you were walking on it, it sounded like water was coming up.
But her main concern is mold. She served 20 years in the Air Force but had to go on convalescent leave in October after developing blisters across her body and respiratory issues.
All the same symptoms as someone that's been exposed to black mold.
She called in Mark Mongan, an environmental specialist with TCB EnviroCorps.
I've been doing this for 35 years. I've seen the nastiest of the nasty, and this was probably one of the worst houses that I've seen.
He says due to a burst water heater, AC leak, and roof leak, mold had built up in every room of the house.
The air samples were 10 times higher than normal.
I reached out to Kincaid's landlord, who wasn't willing to share her perspective. Her landlord's attorney said he couldn't comment because the issue will likely have to go before a judge. Now that she has the inspection and a lawyer, she's hoping to finally close this chapter of her life.
Then I find a place and I can move in there with peace and have my kids and my health gets better and I would never have to deal with these people ever again.
Kincaid's attorney says that they will be suing to cover her medical bills, and whether they sue first or she gets sued by her landlord first, the fur is about to fly. On the east side, Zach Wilcox, First Coast News, on your side.
He told me one apartment was so thick with mold, the health department inspector said it was an imminent health hazard, and the family inside, including a newborn, would have to move out. From the outside, everything looks fine, but inside, residents say it is a different story.
Like I said, I've been here 6 years. I've seen them paint these apartments at least 4 times. I've seen them paint the inside, the outside. The mold continues to grow back to the point in one of the buildings, the mold was on the outside. And so they painted the outside.
These are pictures in Veronica Johnson's apartment at Inglewood. Ceiling tiles in the bathroom fell down. You can see the black mold covering the tiles and the wall.
Black mold everywhere. They came, they looked at it, they did nothing. My husband tore the sheetrock down and threw it away. We had to do it ourselves.
Some residents told me mold in these apartments is making their children sick.
My son, he has very bad asthma and he has seizures. He's on 4 different medications because of the mold. His doctor had gave him steroids. They were at 40 milligrams, but because of the mold and everything we've been dealing with, it's up to 110.
When Councilman Dan Fowler heard about the problems, he brought the Kansas City Health Department inspectors. They checked on Saturday and re-inspected today. Fowler called conditions disgusting.
The entire ceiling of a room had fallen in, and the insulation that was above it was totally black with mold.
Residents are frustrated with the owners.
Like I tell them, you don't have to live out here. You're going to go home to your nice apartment. You have air. Your children are not sick. You don't have to worry about your son not breathing or him having seizures because of the mold, and they just don't care.
Now, residents here told me they know people will say, why don't you just move out? But they explained it takes money and you have to have another place to go. And some residents here do not have either.
It's been sickness after sickness, cold, bronchitis, double ear infections, everything.
The Irvin family moved into the Santo Terrace neighborhood 6 years ago, run by Lincoln Military Housing. They say the problem started day one.
The upstairs was leaking down from the tub to the garage, so all of our stuff that was in boxes was flooding.
She says the illnesses persisted over the years and doctors couldn't tell them what was wrong.
He's been coughing to the point where he's throwing up at night. You're okay.
Even the dog developed a rash.
Cooper.
They blame mold in their home.
Mid-October, Nancy says it got worse when housing came in and taped over every single one of their vents, shutting off their air and heat.
Nancy said a company came out to clean the vents, but she feels that's not enough.
Housing is doing nothing. They're not talking to anybody. They're not giving information, and it's just stressful.
Neighbors say they're also dealing with the same issue, posting these photos.
We're completely black with fluffy mold.
Things are looking up.
Former Bachelorette winner Ryan Sutter is finally getting some answers. The 46-year-old, who has been battling a mystery illness for the past year, now knows what's causing his almost paralyzing fatigue. While on his wife Trist's podcast, Better Etc. on Tuesday, he shared that he has been diagnosed with Lyme disease, which was triggered by high levels of mold in his body. Ryan said it's eye-opening how difficult it is to figure out what is wrong with you. But after going through several tests and blood work, the doctors determined what was wrong.
Like we mentioned, I already have this predisposition to toxins. So my body's having a hard time fighting those off. The mold toxicity test came back positive, which meant that I was dealing with mold in my body. And what Dr. Carnahan had said is that mold is really hard on your immune system, that it will devastate your immune system and weaken it.
Ryan is a firefighter. In the midst of his health struggles, he was working long hours, which only weakened his immune system.
On top of being exposed to mold, I was also dealing with these long days, exhaustion, dehydration, all these other things that weaken your immune system, products of combustion. So my immune system was weakened, making it difficult to fight off infections, or what it seems like allowing prior infections that my immune system had been able to sort of suppress and keep down to resurface. One of those infections was indeed Lyme disease. So I tested positive for Lyme disease.
Aside from Lyme disease, he also tested positive for several viruses.
I now essentially have Lyme disease. It seems like that's something that I will always have. It's just that now I know, and I can start to try to build back my immune system so that I can fight it off. Again, Epstein-Barr, I had shown that virus. This weakened immune system may have allowed that to kind of come back in. On top of that, COVID. So I had the COVID virus, EBV virus, and Lyme disease all were able to start to show back up.
Trist also opened up about what it was like seeing her husband go through all the tests and health problems.
It's been hard. It's a really difficult thing to see the person that you love most in this world struggling. And he's a big, strong guy. And to see him get emotional and feel helpless in a way, in that all I could do was really advocate for him. So that's what I did.
Now that Ryan has some answers, he is working on treating his illness and is starting to feel better.
I truly believe that we're on the right path now. And very thankful for where we are and for everyone who's helped us get there, whether that's the doctors, or family support, or even all of the people that have written in on social media or in other avenues. Things are looking up.
From mold to mildew, there are things around you can see that make you sick. And there are things you can't.
It's invisible. You can't see it, smell it, touch it, taste it.
Alan Bell is a former Broward County prosecutor. He's used to getting to the bottom of crime cases, but he had a difficult time solving his own medical mystery.
And started going to the doctors, and they said, well, it's just a cold. It'll get better. But it didn't. It actually got worse.
Did anyone ever tell you that you were crazy for feeling that way?
They questioned psychological components of it, but when it ultimately morphed into grand mal seizures, there's no faking that.
Months later, he says he discovered the new building he was working in at the time was making him sick.
The new carpeting, the new glues, the new paints, all the new ingredients were recirculating around in the air.
They're called volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, gases that can come from paint, wood, even office equipment. They can have short and long-term effects on your health.
And what I discovered is that I wasn't alone.
The Environmental Protection Agency calls it sick building syndrome, and estimates are that 3 in 10 new or remodeled buildings may have it. Issues with indoor air quality, people complaining about everything from chest tightness to muscle aches.
There is help, but it can be hard to find. You can fill out an online request to have your workplace investigated by the federal government, but we found that's only happened 13 times in Florida over the past decade. And when it does, the results can take years to come back.
Do you hear of this often where people get sick from a new building? Absolutely.
Using a federal grant, University of Miami professor Naresh Kumar says he has developed a solution.
A brand new building can be living hell.
He helped create this, an electronic monitor that measures in real time the levels of VOCs in the air. It notifies you when it reaches harmful levels.
An extremely high concentration of VOCs can cause many different disorders.
He's working to get the cost down so it can be used just like carbon monoxide detectors. As for Bell, after finding the cause of his sickness, he has devoted his life to helping others avoid what happened to him.
Nobody is immune from this. It doesn't matter if you're rich or poor or black or white or Jewish or Muslim, or it doesn't matter. We're all equally at risk.
As an environmental advocate, he believes there's nothing better than breathing in the fresh air.
A local woman was awoken in the night to the sound of her 4-year-old daughter struggling to breathe. She rushed her to a local hospital to find out the girl was showing symptoms of mold exposure.
The mold that got her sick was the same one that she had warned Plumtree Apartments about, but she claims that they told her there was nothing to worry about.
Kyle Macon was at those apartments today. He's here for you now. Kyle, what is the situation there?
Sherry Lauren, when I walked into her apartment, I was immediately hit with air that made it tough to breathe. I left with a headache and my chest hurt, but I was able to leave. Kira Woodson and her 2 kids are stuck with nowhere to go.
I don't know how long it's been in here, and we're just inhaling these fumes to where my daughter is like, Mom, I can't breathe.
This is Kyra Woodson describing the dire situation in her home at Plumtree Apartments. For months, she and her 2 children were breathing in harmful mold, but she tells 6 News her apartment complex claims they did a mold test, but they were wrong.
I had to wake up with my daughter not breathing. Was the most scary part. And I didn't know why, but Plumtree says that they conducted a test, which would have meant that you guys knew all along if the test was conducted.
After receiving news at the hospital that her daughter was showing symptoms of mold exposure, she took matters into her own hands and paid $500 to get someone to test the mold. When she got the results, she was told she had to leave immediately.
He has said that there were 11 different toxic molds found in my home, and 2 of them aren't even supposed to be in a residential property. And all of them were found in my daughter's bedroom where she was inhaling everything.
Her 4-year-old daughter already has asthma, but now she's stuck doing breathing treatments every 4 hours. But still, Plumtree hasn't tried to relocate them, leaving the family homeless.
They haven't even followed up with us yet to tell us to relocate us, and they have right now on they're on their website 4 different properties available.
Make matters worse, all of her belongings must stay in the apartment.
The spores are so deep embedded to where if we take them to our new house, whenever we get one, it's so embedded in there that basically I'm transferring mold from one spot to a new spot.
Down my wall just coming in.
Walk into Erica Ray's condo.
And we've got mold and black mold in here.
And the smell of mildew and moisture is overwhelming.
I was already sick, and every morning I was getting up and I was just coughing. My children were coughing.
With chemo treatments and her health at risk, Erica made the decision to get out. She's staying in a nearby hotel thanks to other Royal Crescent neighbors.
They're literally paying for me and my children to be able to live. I'm trying to cry. In this place so we don't have to be here and risk a chance of me either dying or getting sick from the mold.
Royal Crescent Condominium's property manager confirmed to ABC Action News mold and water issues have been reported for decades.
I haven't been able to live here for over a year.
Sarai Cruz says she's had issues with water leaking into her apartment the past 5 years.
You go inside and I started coughing so much and then I couldn't breathe.
Although residents own their condos, the HOA is responsible for exterior maintenance. Sarai pays $280 a month in HOA fees. Erica pays $305.
And I'm just not seeing my money at work here.
If it was me personally, until we can get the problem fixed, I would move out.
On the walls, and the mold is right here when you come in the door. The first thing, the first time they done it, they didn't take out the walls, they didn't do nothing, and the mold has grown since then.
Their calls to the company were ignored, and now Catherine James's 85-year-old mother and their 13-month-old granddaughter were forced to leave.
Everybody's so sick and coughing, and nobody wants to, I don't know what else to do to fix the problem so my family can, have the nice home that, that we want.
The Williams hired an environmental specialist who found black mold on their baseboards and in their ventilation system, spreading mold throughout their home.
It's going to have to be cut out. The sheetrock's going to have to be cut out. The carpet's going to have to go. And we don't know what kind of hidden damage is in there until they get into the walls.
Blue Bronco Real Estate eventually responded to the family, but did not address the mold problem. We also called. But our calls were not answered, our messages not returned. We found the company had an F rating with the Better Business Bureau, which received 6 complaints against the company in the past 3 years.
We're not going to live here. We can't live here. And they're not doing nothing to help us.
That's all I want them to do is just, something to fix the situation.
We have an update tonight to a story that you saw first on 2, black mold at Arcola City Hall in Fort Bend County. Now the chief of police we interviewed for that story has been fired, and he says it's retaliation. Channel 2 investigator Joel Eisenbaum is getting to the bottom of this story tonight. Joel?
Bill, I'll tell you what, from the outside looking in, Arcola City government looks like a hot mess. City council meetings are nearly indiscernible and confusing. City Hall is full of black mold, and now the city's police chief has been canned.
How bad is it in here?
2 weeks ago, we gave you a walking tour of Arcola's police department and City Hall. It's a building brimming with black mold, according to an independent report.
Where are they going to process these individuals?
The police chief ordered his officers start wearing respirators inside the building, and he's been vocal about city council inaction.
When they found out that they had mold in the building, they continued to let the employees come to the workplace. At some point, we had officers going to the doctor's office or hospital on a daily basis.
Sinuses, asthma, allergic reactions.
Mold. We've all heard the warnings out there, but some say that they're being exposed to it on their jobs at government buildings across South Florida. NBC6 investigator Willard Shepard found that mold is not only a health risk, but getting rid of it isn't cheap, and taxpayers are paying the price.
Mold in walls, chairs, ceilings. The photos taken at a Miami-Dade County Correctional Facility during an inspection last May. This employee, who asked us to protect our identity, isn't surprised.
I got very sick while working in the building.
From asthma to allergic reactions, she says.
Right now I have to have sinus surgery. I have to have allergy shot.
She and others complained to county authorities. They took pictures, even paid for mold testing. The county recently closed down one of the areas where mold was detected, but the employee says their health is still at risk.
We continue to be exposed to that on a daily basis.
It's not the first time. Just 2 years ago, mold was spotted over safety gear stored inside the building. The estimated cost to clean it, $16,000.
Does the general public come in the building?
Yes, they do.
Since 2013, Miami-Dade has spent more than $2 million fighting mold issues at least a dozen facilities, including Miami International Airport and the county courthouse, where a cleanup crew showed up last summer.
They should advise people of what's going on and the issues with the building.
Mold was visible.
Mold found in the courtroom, behind the wallpaper.
NBC6 found Miami-Dade is not alone. In Broward, employees have filed 36 claims because of mold exposure in the past 5 years. The county tells us about $1 million has gone towards the cleanup efforts since. And we found problems at federal facilities too.
I was exposed to mold from the first day.
Latta Thomas says he left his job at this federal prison after his health started deteriorating.
I developed rash, I developed breathing problems.
Records show the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, also known as OSHA, cited the prison for mold violations twice, the latest in June.
My physical system was combating mold every time that I was there. And it created a problem in terms of my being able to do my job.
The county employee shares the concern.
They're not providing us with a healthy environment to work in.
Miami-Dade County declined to comment about mold issues at the facility known as the Women's Detention Center. In a statement, the Federal Bureau of Prisons told us they don't comment on personnel matters, and the mold has been cleaned up. Willard Shepard, NBC6 News.
And that family's attorney says that the patient contracted a deadly mold infection while here at the hospital, and he later died. Now, it was so bad, in fact, that they say he got delirious at one point, cut through his tubes, ran outside and got into the parking lot naked before later dying a short time after he was brought back inside and got more treatment. But they say the main thrust of their argument is that UPMC knew how dangerous that mold was, but they didn't follow their own policies to prevent other patients from getting it.
It's absolutely essential that someone take this seriously, and no one has.
Lawyers for Daniel Krieg's family told me UPMC didn't follow its own policies on preventing mold, even though 4 other patients before him got fungal infections and died. They believe that same mold is what took the life of the 56-year-old at Montefiore in July.
He was a relatively young guy. He had had a kidney transplant, which generally speaking has a very high success rate, and people in many instances live fruitful lives. And his was unnecessarily cut short. He had a family that loved him, and it's a very significant loss.
The lawsuit filed today claims Krieg was put in a so-called negative pressure isolation room at Montefiore, shown in this picture, even though the hospital knew the rooms could expose patients to mold infections. They also say UPMC didn't put Krieg on antifungal medication until it was too late, even though that was part of their new policy. And they didn't watch Krieg closely enough for a fungal infection when his health fell apart quickly.
UPMC was intimately aware with how dangerous violations of those policies were at that point in time. They'd already seen it destroy the lives of 4 other transplant patients in the year and a half prior to Dan, and yet all of the violations were allowed to occur again.
It could be, but we're not looking at it right now. When the federal authorities get done with their review, there may be issues that we want to address.
What potentially or theoretically?
We had people die. We had people die. Under what circumstances did they die? So we'd have to explore that.
4 UPMC patients developed mold infections in the past year. 3 of those have died. No direct cause and effect link has been established.
What's on the radar is people have died. So yeah, we're watching what's going on, and if it becomes appropriate for us to play some role in this, then we will.
I asked the DA what specific criteria could determine if the death of UPMC patients who suffered mold infections should be reviewed by his investigators.
Recklessness. I don't think anybody intended that people die from this. You could have criminal negligence. There's all kinds of, I'm speculating, but those would be the areas.
John Haynes, a 65-year-old retiree from Upper St. Clair, had leukemia and bacterial pneumonia when he was admitted to UPMC Shadyside last September. But he didn't have a fungus infection, his family's lawsuit claims, until after he was here a few weeks. He died in October.
How many do we have here in a year and a half span in the UPMC system? There's clearly something very concerning here.
The family's attorneys blame UPMC and Paris Healthcare Linen Services for the mold, rhizopus, that is listed on his death certificate. UPMC won't answer on camera, but tells us, quote, Mr. Haynes was very sick when he was admitted to UPMC Shadyside Hospital in September. We are saddened by his death. Unfortunately, rhizopus-related infections happen at major medical centers where the sickest of the sick are treated despite the best possible care.
It's very disturbing for them to say, well, these are really sick people. Well, that's certainly not what they say to the families when they're encouraging them to have the transplants.
So thanks everybody for coming today. We wanted to bring everybody together for what we feel is a pretty significant development in this ongoing UPMC mold outbreak matter. And today, just an hour ago, we filed a new wrongful death claim against both UPMC and Paris Linens related to this outbreak. This relates to a gentleman named John Haynes, who was 65 years old at the time of his death. He had been recently diagnosed with cancer and was being treated for it at UPMC Shadyside. He was doing, from a pulmonary standpoint, very well for several weeks inside Shadyside, until he developed a rhizopus infection, which is one of the exact type of molds that's been much reported on. And then he died specifically as a result of that fungal infection. Exhibits attached to the complaint demonstrate that his medical records, the doctors at UPMC concluded that it was one of these fungal infections that caused this man's death, and that he definitively developed it while he was in UPMC. And we are continuing with the claims that this was a combined cause from both the actions or inactions of UPMC, but also very much so this Paris Linen Company that supplied contaminated linens to all of UPMC's hospitals for some times based on test results that we've received in the past.
Thursday night, a liver transplant patient rapidly showed signs of a fungal infection and died at UPMC Montefiore. That hospital is connected only by this bridge to UPMC Presbyterian, where 2 heart transplant patients who spent time in the cardiothoracic ICU died over the past year from the same mold infection. One of those patients inhaled it. The other had a fungal infection on the skin. UPMC Chief Medical and Scientific Officer Dr. Stephen Shapiro says the Presby CTICU remains closed while the CDC, state and local health departments try to find the mold source.
It was found behind the walls, and we suspected potentially if there was water leakage from a line or from the potty or something that could have contributed, and we're working on actively changing out all of that.
But UPMC says nothing has been found at Montefiore to indicate how this latest patient became infected. While they say no one else shows signs of infection, UPMC is being proactive with all transplant patients.
We have new antifungal therapy that we're going to give prophylactically to prevent the possibility of infection in those that are currently here.
Well, yes, Dan Krieg was 56 years old. He lived in St. Mary's, Pennsylvania, but he died in July after contracting a mold infection at UPMC Montefiore Hospital. Tonight, his nephew tells me he's angry. Angry because he believes that UPMC knew that the linens they were getting from a local company contained the mold that killed those 5 people. And tonight, he fears more people are still at risk. Dan Krieg knew he had a fight ahead of him when he took his sister's kidney, but never envisioned the fight that would come after his death, that his nephew has taken on.
Big corporations that I'm fighting against, and I'm trying to make them be accountable for, literally killing people. And it's a struggle because it's about money. It's not about anything else. If I would have settled with them, we would have never found this out.
Jesse Krieg is talking about this 16-page report provided by UPMC that his attorneys say proves the patients who died from mold infections were exposed to it by UPMC's linen supplier, Paris, a company from Du Bois. Attorney Brendan Lupiton says the report's findings were stunning.
Pumping in unfiltered air from outside its facility onto clean linen to cool it down as part of the drying process. Surrounding this vent was heavy loads of the fungus, the same fungus that contributed to the deaths and the infections of all these. All we're asking for is for the CDC to please come back, please conclude your investigation and determine if, in fact, this is the explanation and whether it's been fixed.
The end goal for me is for them to own it and fix it, because there can't be 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 that die next. And I fear for that.
This is the 25-page class action lawsuit filed this morning against Seattle Children's Hospital. The attorneys that filed this claim the hospital has known about the Aspergillus mold for years, and they say the hospital's been trying to cover it up ever since. When the CEO of Seattle Children's Hospital admitted there was Aspergillus mold on campus, it shocked the public. These attorneys who've been studying Aspergillus cases say managers have known since at least 2005 and failed to take steps to remedy the problem.
This action is really targeted against the management, the Building and Engineering Department of Seattle Children's, about a systemic cover-up that's existed now for almost 19 years.
In a previous news conference, hospital CEO Jeff Sparing says 14 patients developed Aspergillus infections at the hospital. Of the 6 children that died of Aspergillus, one of them was Logan Schaefer, an infant. Logan was exposed to the mold in 2005 while he was at the hospital for heart surgery. The court documents say he died of a heart aneurysm caused by the fungus. Attorney John Lehman thinks the mold exposure goes beyond the operating rooms, and he believes there are many more who have been sickened.
And you have numerous children that come in there without Aspergillus, and after they're there 2 weeks to a month, they develop the Aspergillus. And that's when we know we have a poorly functioning HVAC system.
Lehman says he told the hospital about its contaminated HVAC system back in 2005 when he and a family filed a lawsuit against Children's for Aspergillus.
Part of the process, we discovered that there were problems with the HVAC systems throughout the entire hospital, not just the operating suites. And you have a significant number of the immunocompromised patients that are developing aspergillus infections, pulmonary or otherwise.
Is your work making you sick? Some Spartanburg County workers say yes.
They're citing a new report that shows the courthouse has a mold problem, and some employees are worried the fix won't be good enough.
Today, staff at the Spartanburg County Courthouse wearing masks, concerned by the results of a new report on the health of the building they work in.
I'm sure it's this mold and everything that's in here. I'm just constantly rubbing my eyes because they're just itching.
Kimberly McKinney told us how her office floods when rainwater leaks through the windows and ceiling.
The problem is the building. We can all agree to that.
Clerk of Court Hope Blackley showed us other flooding photos and the mold that comes after. She's been pushing the county to take action for 2 years.
This particular courtroom, I've had a judge just a couple weeks ago said, I can't go back in there. I feel sick every time I go in there. What do?
These photos show how the air vents in that room were covered in black. Even after being replaced, the recent indoor environmental quality investigation revealed microbial contamination within the wall cavity of the courtroom. The solicitor's wing has elevated levels of mold in the air. Judge Turner's room, worse yet, toxic black mold in the walls. But what concerns employees the most, spores in the HVAC system.
So it's possible for a mold bloom to occur and to be blown out through the supply ducts, and that's also past the filtration.
The jury is out on whether the county will need a new courthouse altogether someday, but for now it's agreed to put up $300,000 toward the mold remediation.
We've got to do something about the structure itself.
Blackley says she's glad to see progress, but concerned the fix may be more a band-aid than a permanent solution.
An independent study earlier this year found toxic, cancer-causing mold inside the building.
I have a hazmat suit on because this is pretty much what everybody needs to have right now.
Workers hoping their message is heard that the courthouse is an unsafe place to work.
Get your people out of here. Put them in a safe environment. We're not breathing in these mold spores. We're not breathing in this hazardous material.
The local union representing these workers has been holding rallies outside the courthouse over the past several weeks, demanding the state shut down the building and build a new one.
I've always had a little bit of allergies, but now last 15 years I've had sinus infections.
Before moving to a temporary work location, Donna Jascully has worked in the courthouse for the last 17 years. She's blaming the recent mold findings as the cause for her asthma because of the building's air quality.
I'm hoping that they'll close the building down and build a new courthouse, because this building, you can't cover up mold. I think it keeps growing back.
We fought with the trial court for the last 6 months to get testing done that the trial court not only refused to do, it neglected to do, despite knowing all of the illness that was going on in that building. We did the testing that the employees requested. We did the testing that the judges requested, that the community demanded. And the results are in. We pulled up the rugs. We went behind the walls. We got the answers. And it's unequivocal. That courthouse is littered with dangerous levels of toxic, cancer-causing mold. And it is not safe for the employees or members of the public to enter that building for any reason. We are hereby demanding again and requesting for the safety and health of the employees of that building and for members of the public and for the Western Mass community that that courthouse be closed immediately.
Now, unsurprisingly, the analysis showed that the courthouse contained numerous mold spores, including known molds that are known pathogens, or molds that cause disease and health issues. These pathogenic molds can produce toxins, which have demonstrated to produce neurodegenerative and cancer-causing effects in animals and humans. Pathogenic spores were found in the air samples, the dust samples, the swab samples, and the samples taken from within the closed wall structure. In other words, the spores were in the breathable air, the carpets, the exposed surfaces, and within the hidden spaces of the courthouse. Now, it should be noted that the American Industrial Hygiene Association states that there are no safe levels of uncontained pathogenic molds. In this case, our expert found pathogenic spores in one of the air handling units that provides air to approximately 25% of the occupied courthouse. Spores were also found in a separate duct of the same air handler that had fiberglass. According to the AIHA, this means that immediate steps must be taken to remediate the pathogenic spores found within the air handler and the duct unit. The EPA states that the HVAC system should not be run while it is contaminated. Our expert also looked at Judge's Lobby 204A, the offices of Judge Coomer and Boyle. And unsurprisingly, there were dangerous pathogens found in that room as well. Studies have shown that the pathogens found in room 204A is one of the most dangerous species for humans in infected rooms, owing to the toxic and carcinogenic properties of that mold. An extremely high concentration of pathogenic spores were also found in dust samples in the lower level of the building, which indicates a widespread distribution of large numbers of pathogens. Therefore, prompt steps are necessary to contain and remediate the airborne and surface mold through the courthouse. We also did behind-the-wall testing, which again the trial court has refused to do, even though we've been begging for it since September. The simple truth is that this courthouse needs to be closed now. The people of Western Massachusetts cannot wait another 2 years for the trial court to try to find a new building. We as a community should not be forced to choose between our health and justice.
Obviously, since I received this report, I ordered everybody out, and we're going to make do. Everybody will work. Unfortunately, some of us are at Dwight Street and some of us are at Westfield. It's very close quarters, but we're not going back into that building. It is not safe, and people are dying. Like, that's what it's about, right? So I was just telling some of my friends here that, you know, if you worked in that building and you saw smoke, you would all leave. You wouldn't wait to find out where the smoke came from. You would just leave, right? Well, this is similar. This is like carbon monoxide. You can't see it, but it's there. And you roll the dice whether you live or not in 10, 20, 30 years. And I cannot, and the secretary obviously cannot, in good conscience, send anyone back into that building. And the other thing, I did call on the unions. I've called on the unions to get their people out. The state is in violation of their contract. They are working in hazardous conditions. Therefore, they can go, they can walk out. We need those unions to come, rally the troops, get your employees, and get them out of this building. So I call on the unions wherever they are, whether it's Boston, Western Mass. They need to get involved, and they need to protect their employees. That's why we have unions in the Commonwealth and in this country, to protect employees, especially when they're working in hazardous conditions.
You're making a choice as to whether to go in there and get justice or whether to put your health at risk every time you walk through that door. Been getting rid of the mold, unless you fix where the mold is going to be coming in from, it's just going to keep coming back in. So you can fix it from the inside, but if you're not fixing what's coming in from the outside, you're just going to continue to get mold over a period of time. So from our perspective, the building is really just needs to be either torn down or completely replaced.
Studies that show that environmental conditions, including potentially PCBs and other toxic molds, are likely linked to ALS and Lou Gehrig's disease. But the molds that are found do have neurodegenerative consequences, and of course ALS is a neurodegenerative disease. So if there's no further questions, I'd like to thank everyone for coming out here and braving the weather for our press conference. Thank you.